What is going on, everybody? 'Tis I, the enigma of the gun airwaves, Miyanovich, welcoming you to Season 3 of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, where unprecedented perspectives are packed into the cargo hold for the LGO Lens spaceship Voyagio.
That's fucking Italian.
Don't believe that evolution is possible with guns and public safety in America? It's already happening, y'all. Minds are evolving. Think guns versus public safety is the only game in town, do ya? Think culture war is the big boss, do ya? Then keep your ass in the past. Everyone else, all aboard! Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast. It is I, Miyanovich, and here we go with another golden nugget for you guys. Today, I am introducing you to Kofi Kenyatta. Kofi is the owner of Kenyatta Consulting Group, a company that focuses on systemic and racial equality problem solving across all domains. Kofi is the former senior director of policy and practice for Up Together, a company that has had great success empowering people who are in financial hardship through supporting several guaranteed income programs throughout the United States. Alongside Chad King, Kofi is the co-founder of the Black Bottom Gun Club in Detroit. The Black Bottom Gun Club is consistently recognized as one of the most influential and important chapters of the National African American Gun Association. I will reference a podcast in this discussion series with Kofi, and this podcast is done by the online magazine Detroit is Different. If you go to YouTube and search Black Bottom Gun Club and the word Detroit, you will find it. I really think it's an essential piece of gun content if you are a liberal and considering the wider reality of gun ownership in America. I consider the Black Bottom Gun Club to be one of the most important gun organizations in America, and hopefully, through listening to the thought leadership provided by both Kofi and Chad on this podcast, you'll understand why. So, without further ado, please join me for this multiple-part series with Kofi Kenyatta. Why don't we just rock right into it there? So I will say, Kofi Kenyatta, welcome to the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, man. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
And by the way, I'm the editor, so if you have to go to the bathroom or take a drink or anything, dog barks, doesn't matter. I got it.
Dog is right here.
Okay, cool. So I want to start off by asking a question. I always say, Kofi, as a gun owner, guns are not the center of life or the universe, and they should never be treated as such. In your life, you do things to benefit the Black community in the Detroit area, and it has nothing to do with guns. So before we talk about guns, let's talk about not guns a little bit.
Okay.
Tell us about your day job and the things that you do to make a stronger community and to address the issues and the root causes of issues that you guys face as a Black community in Detroit.
That's a great question, given that after 10 years with my organization, I decided to resign in February of this year, 2024. And so up until last month, I was the senior director of policy and practice for an organization called Up Together. And Up Together is an nonprofit organization that started in 2001 in Oakland, California. And the whole premise behind Up Together is trusting and investing directly in people. And so we provided direct cash transfers to individuals, as well as equipping them with the resources and the tools in order to accelerate the social capital that already existed in their communities. And so the premise was cash plus community will help individuals achieve social and economic mobility. And so we've been proving that over the course of over 20 years, providing direct cash transfers to marginalized communities across the country, including Detroit. I started off at the organization as the Detroit site director before moving to a regional director overseeing 5 states, and then transitioning to the policy and practice senior directorship role responsible for facilitating government adoption across the country. And so we run many guaranteed income projects across the country, as well as identify opportunities to incorporate direct cash into existing government programs. And so that has been very rewarding, getting in contact and community with individuals across the country, and just seeing the way that trust and cash has on helping individuals achieve their goals and dreams. You know, there's a really paternalistic model of If you're living impoverished, then you need to go back to school. You need a financial literacy course. You need to do X, Y, and Z. And really what we found out through our data and really just our innate belief in people is that, minus the systemic barriers, which are plentiful, if you equip individuals with the resources and flexibility to do what they feel is what's best for them, they do that and they receive better outcomes than traditional programming. And so I decided to resign in February because I've been there for quite some time. I've experienced some transitions in my life, being married in 2022, having our son in 2023, and began to think about what I want the next phase of my life to look like, the next chapter. Feel like I've accomplished quite a bit in the previous 10 years and decided to think about some other opportunities. And so I started a consulting firm called Kenyatta Consulting Group, and I'm supporting grassroots and smaller nonprofits, organizations. In the nonprofit sector, you will see that a lot of the name brand, well-resourced, well-connected nonprofits receive a lot of the philanthropic funding. But the actual people doing the work in the community that are connected to the people don't have development teams, but they are doing the work that is changing lives. And so I started the Kenyatta Consulting Group to help those individuals out. And so that's what I've been doing for the past 2 months.
And is that mostly your consulting group? Is that mostly regional? Like it's focused on the Detroit area still, doing something similar to what you were doing before?
So what I was doing before was on a national level. Okay. I started the Detroit site and then I progressed to a regional and then a national role. So I had the opportunity to work with communities across the country. Right now, my first contract was with my former organization. So that worked out, right? And so I'm still doing some national work. A few of the other contracts that I have are local, but I am open to working with entities across the country and really just taking this year to identify the suite of services that I want to offer professionally. So I had the privilege of, taking that time to really figure things out.
It's tough, man, when you want to go out on your own. I've been running businesses for a couple decades, and when you let go of that rope, when somebody else was in charge and they paid all the overhead and took care of all that, man, that's scary.
Yeah. I was telling a friend of mine, was like, I waited until I had all these responsibilities. I was a single man for decades, and I could have took all the risk in my life. I waited till I had a wife and kids to take this leap.
Yeah, man, that's doubling up the pain there, or doubling up the stress. But it's good that you got that contract with your former organization to pad that up, pad that transition a little bit.
Yeah.
So you might not know this about liberal gun owners, but the organization, but our mission is about both gun rights and public safety at the same time. And there's a myth out there that you can't believe in both, or you can't give your heart fully to both, and that's just bullshit. That's what the existing narratives at the firearms ownership, public safety, political nexus want us to believe. And so we have firearms related negatives split into 8 categories, and that's how we approach it. The public safety side, and I know I'm going to forget, but I'm going to try to go through it without the list in front of my head. But it's homicide, suicide, domestic violence. Firearms related domestic violence would be 3. The 4th one would be color on color violence, internecine violence, and communities of color would be 4. 5 would be xenophobic violence, which could also cross over with black on black violence, but that's more like xenophobic violence is violence against that which is considered other. You're other than my group, and I'm going to be violent against your group because you're not my group, right? So that could be LGBTQ. It could be Asians. That could be black people. So that would be 5. Mass shootings would be 6. 7 would be accidents. And then 8 would be police misconduct shootings, right? Those are the 8 areas that we have to focus on. And of course, one of those is violence in communities of color. So what you and Chad are doing covers like a number of those categories, which is why I've said before, I think the Black Bottom Gun Club, and initially Chad, but also what you do is
one of the most important discoveries for liberal gun owners was you guys. And unfortunately, right when I discovered you guys, the year after, or a year and a half after, we got hit financially. But you guys are doing a lot right at the grindstone, right at the grassroots. You're not just doing the guns part. You guys are also involved in all the other parts too. And so for my money, in my mind, this is why people need to know about you and Chad and the Black Bottom Gun Club, because you guys are there doing the work. And like you said, you broke off and you're doing your own thing. There are people that are at the grassroots that are grinding it out. And those people are struggling for a resource. But in the society, especially in liberal progressive society, we're constantly like, we need a grassroots, we need to do the thing and the stuff. But then why are the people that are grinding it out still struggling for the resources? Like, there's a lot of talk, as you know, more well than I do. So let's see, you brought up in the podcast that you and I had been talking about, that you and Chad were on, so let's talk about it this way. All of the problems that can happen in the Black community, all the way up until the point where the gun's involved, where armed self-defense is involved. There's a lot of shit. The most of the shit is I would even say that, I say that for self-defense. Most of the self-defense stuff that you need to deal with, there's a lot of it. The gun is last. It's important. But there's so many other things that are involved in what might end up being the use of a gun defensively or even offensively. Mm-hmm. In your experience and what you've been doing, let's talk about economic security, food security, root causes, and what you called community power, holistic power. Let's talk about that part. So what are you doing with the Black Bottom Gun Club or otherwise to make sure that in Detroit, people have access to economic security, food security, and in dealing with root causes?
Yeah, that's a great question. And something that Chad and I often mention is that Black folks don't have the privilege of being single issue voters. And so we don't have the luxury of just saying that because this typically Democratic candidate isn't aligned with our perspective, gun ownership or firearm ownership, that we can't support them because we can't look at it in isolation. We have to be more mature in the way that we approach the political landscape because of the issues that we're cognizant of in our community. And so when we talk about root causes go back into the founding of our country. Sure. And the ripple impact that systems of oppression has had on Black people and other communities. And so speaking of the Black community, it's like, where do you start when we talk about root causes? But as it relates to the Black Bottom Gun Club, we think about some of the things that you just mentioned. We think about poverty. We think about our educational system here in the city of Detroit. We think about the local political landscape. We think about capitalism and how the American economy operates. And so when my father was an educator, my mother was an educator, my wife was an educator. And so something prevalent in the educational spirit is wraparound services, because you can have the most entrenched programming and educational system in the school system. But the kids are coming into that school system from communities that are riddled with violence, riddled with not just poverty, but concentrated poverty, which also has an impact. And a whole host of other issues as well. And so when we talk about wraparound services, we talk about a more holistic approach in addressing the issues and providing equity that child needs. And so the Black Bottom Gun Club takes that approach into firearm ownership. So, if you think about education as education and the Black Bottom Gun Club being focused on the Second Amendment and firearm ownership, we also take a wraparound services approach. Because we have to be mindful of, before we go into a school and do a firearm training workshop, or before we go into a school and do a stop and bleed workshop, we have to understand what's taking place in that school environment. If a kid has just been stopped from trying to sneak a firearm to the school, and then we come in the next day and do a firearms workshop, that may seem the right thing to do. But we also have to consider the nuances and what needs to take place before we just introduce firearms into that community.
Yeah.
There are some other things that need to take place before we go into these environments. And so, that's the approach that we take when we think about violence in our community. Um, uh, I don't necessarily think of it as color on color. I think of it more so as, proximity based, as individuals living in close proximity, engaging or enduring similar circumstances, depending on those circumstances, sometimes lead to negative encounters, poor emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, things of that nature. And so we have to address those things, but also look at the systems that create the conditions that our people are enduring. And so I've been in the economic mobility space professionally for the past 10 years, in the nonprofit sector for almost 15 years. And so through all the academic research and data that I'm seeing, it is clear, even if it's not a causation, there's a correlation between poverty and lack of opportunity and resources to violence that we see in our communities. And so if you're not addressing that, if your model is just, well, this was a gun violence situation, let's just take away the guns, and not addressing the root causes to that, I think that is naive, short-sighted, and misguided. And a lot of times we see our officials taking that approach because they don't want to do the grunt work, the real work, the work that takes more time and intentionality in order to address these issues. And so our role is to highlight those root cause situations, those systems of oppression that create these conditions, because we believe that the only way to address violence and gun violence in our communities is to address those root causes. And that's not a quick fix. If you just want to lock everybody up, well, yeah, I'm sure gun violence would drop to the floor because everyone's locked up. But no one in the right mind would say that is a viable solution. Nobody in the right mind. I'm sure there are some people that would say that is an appropriate solution. But that is not an appropriate solution for us. We believe that we need to address those root causes in a meaningful way and really do so with a community engaged design approach, and not just hiring high priced consultants, but actually listening to the people who are closest to those issues, because those individuals are often, most times, closest to the solutions as well.
I mean, that gives me about 100 different things, 100 different directions I could go, from things that I've discussed before on this podcast about epigenetic generational trauma and essentially what amounts to brain damage. It's not, that happens with all humans. This isn't just the Black community, but this is something that, our legal system is basically in the dark age, as it pertains to the cognitive sciences and what the actual behavioral effects are of poverty or abuse or institutional abuse.
Trauma.
They're profoundly deep. And not only is our legal system running on a behavioral folk understanding of behavior and psychology that came from the 17th and 18th century, but our government and most Western governments run on a pace that's enormously slow, and there's really no way to make it go any faster because they're all this large behemoth of a state. They're not matched for the neurological science reality, that like really getting to the root causes. I see policy as important and vital, but I don't think that these behemoth type machines are going to catch up to the neurological, cognitive, behavioral reality in any significant way in the next 100 years. So, to my mind, you guys have not just an unfathomable challenge, right, that you're up against. I'm not saying that it's hopeless or anything like that. I'm just saying that because I want people to understand that when the Black community is dealing with 2A, and dealing with rights and dealing with responsibility, it's not like on another planet, right? And in order to do it properly. So, I just want people to understand like the nuance and the complexity of it. because we're talking about all the way to the level of DNA and epigenetics. And then we're talking about neurology, behavior, culture, socioeconomics. There isn't a level that this isn't tied into. And so when the Democratic Party gets up there and goes, whatever they do, weapons of war off the streets or whatever, they're so far afield of even addressing the symptoms properly, let alone addressing the root causes. And so it's kind of important, I think, for people to understand that and how profound this is and how enormously expensive it is to deal with properly. And I don't just mean money, I mean human energy. And for many reasons, from democracy in general to this problem, we can't afford to live in a country where people want to live passively when everything requires us to be active. Like, we can't afford that. These are huge problems, and we can't afford to be that way. Yet we are. It's something I have to stare at all the time, because I too am interested in addressing these problems for real. And I know that while law and policy is important, we're never going to be able to get there through doing just that. People need to grind at this. And as you know from being in the nonprofit sector, it's so hard to get people to grind.
So actually, I would push back a little bit on that premise. And so I think sometimes when it relates to the Black community, individuals tend to pathologize the situation, meaning that it is, a psychological abnormality. This is a cultural issue. It is because, as you mentioned, because of the trauma experience, there is something ingrained in the DNA that causes these issues. And some of that, may be true, but I think most of that has a systemic root. When you talk about lead paint and lead paint and lead in the water and the studies that show how that contributes to certain abnormal behavior, things with that nature. Coming from a policy role, but also been more focused on the systems at play here. I think most of the things that you're talking about have systemic roots. We talked about in my line of work, we talk about child poverty a lot, and we looked at the role of the expanded child tax credit that was introduced during the COVID years. The expanded child tax credit reducing poverty in half. And then I take that information, I look at all of the programs that I've encountered with, not only Detroit, but across the country, that are looking to reduce child poverty, had not nearly the impact that one policy change had, right? And when we look at the policies that were enacted in so many administrations, and the impact that they had on our communities, the assault weapons ban, the crime bill that Biden introduced back in the day. You look at stop and frisk policies. You look at voter disenfranchisement policies. You look at policies that are restricting women's right to choose. We look at all of these policies that are put in place. They have a wide-ranging impact on people, and that impact oftentimes influences behavior, right? It influences the conditions that people are enduring, and then people are in survival mode, and so they make the decisions, right or wrong, that they feel are going to best help them achieve the quality of life or endure the circumstances that they are enduring. And so I think there is a two-pronged approach, well, really a multi-pronged approach. I don't think there's any silver bullet that is going to solve any issue, not just issues relative to the Black community. I think we have to continue to challenge the systems in place. I think we also have to do things on our own, right? When I got into this work, it wasn't that the nonprofit sector or government is going to be the silver solution. I got into this work to mitigate the damage that these systems do to my people, right? And couple that with the work that we have to do internally as a community to develop ourselves, right? And so that's what I do personally, and then there's things that I do. So the Black Bottom Gun Club would be the personal aspect of my work, along with other organizations and my individual work. The work I do professionally is on the systemic side, and so we call that the inside-outside game. There are things that I can do inside the system that I can't do outside the system. There are things that I can do outside the system that I can't do within the system. We have to do both. But I just can't get behind that there's something, despite the root cause of it, pathologically wrong with Black folks. And that's why we're enduring the conditions that we're enduring. You can name a situation that the Black community is experiencing, and I can identify a systemic root to that system. And so I view how I want to spend the trajectory of my life as challenging those systems, because I know the broad ranging impact that correcting or minimizing or mitigating the damage those system has on my community. Because, I have proof, right?
Sure.
In working with elected officials and working with legislators to address systems, and then being able to see the impact that system has had on my community. And so that's the approach that I take, but also realizing that the damage that those systems have done over hundreds of years does play a role. And that has to be addressed as well. I believe that is incumbent on our community to address, but also not doing anything to let the powers that be or the systems off the hook for creating those conditions in the first place.
Yeah. And just to clarify, first, I chose that because the epigenetic thing, because it shows the range.
Mm-hmm.
The range, right? I didn't choose it as an example because it's the defining feature, right? I already know that about scientific racism and how Black people are being seen as less from their DNA all the way to their skin color to everything that we know exists and is bullshit. I chose that because it's something Chad and I have discussed before, but I've also discussed it when we're talking about the Jewish community and the Holocaust, but human beings in general, just being poor and doesn't matter what your skin color is, but being in that kind of press can have generational effects on the neurology in your brain, and your parents can have experienced it and you didn't experience it, but you were born from them and you have these effects. And so, I'm completely with you on the reality of having to address systemics and the now. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that the other thing is also involved too, that there's a profound, right? I don't find it legitimate whatsoever for people that who might want to indicate that Black people act differently because they have brain damage or some shit like that. That's like super simplistic, right? That's definitely not what I was going for with that. And I do think that policy and law works too. I'm just an advocate for some things that I think that you and Chad also advocate, which is you need to use the things that are available to you, but also it's a problem for African Americans to rely on the state, to look to the state to answer all the problems. You're dealing kind of with both of those. Maybe I could ask you about that, like what that's like as a problem solver. You're a problem solver. You're a professional problem solver. How do you guys juggle that? Like you have to fight to get policy assistance or policies in place inside of a system that's trying to screw you over while you're inside of the system, while you know that you can't rely on this system, right? For, I would say like ultimate existential guidance or help. Like, how do you guys balance that, or what's that like? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense? Because I don't know what that's like, Kofi.
Yeah, it makes sense because that is a everyday reality. There are no permanent friends or enemies. It's permanent interest, and so that's the way we approach it. Where our interests as a community, and unfortunately, oftentimes it's not about who is an advocate or a supporter of our interests, who is doing the least harm to our interests. Now, that is a big topic of a debate in our community, right? It's like, well, I don't believe in the lesser of two evils. And I totally understand that perspective from my friends and family members that hold that. But when I look at it from a practical approach, and if there is an entity that is going to make achieving my interests less difficult to achieve, then I may have to vote for that individual, right? Because I have the ultimate goal in mind. Now, there are some red lines that aren't to be crossed where morally I wouldn't be able to, make that vote. And I just have to live with the consequences of that. That is also a reality. And everyone has a different red line. But I think when we, talk about American geopolitics, we do have to make sure that we're focusing our interests while also being cognizant of what's taking place across the world and the impact that has on our communities. I'm someone that considers myself pro-Black, but I'm also a supporter of all marginalized people and people in general. And so, when I think about what's taking place in, Palestine and elsewhere, that does come into focus as I think about, who I'm supporting, who I'm not supporting. But at the bottom line is I am thinking about my community first and foremost, and whether other people say that or not, I think they also agree with that. I think that's the natural human instinct. We tend to be, tribal individuals. But it is a difficult situation to be in if you know or have a basic level of understanding of our history, of Black folks' history in America. You would know that we've always had to make difficult decisions and choices. We've always had to balancing and find the fine line between who's for us, who's against us, who's less harmful to us. But ultimately be aware of the environment that we're working in, the game that is American capitalism, right? And then we also have to be aware of, okay, what are our best chances of survival? And not just survival, but how do we begin to thrive in the system that we're operating in? And there are a lot of different people that have different thoughts and ideas about that. But again, being a realist and being practical in manner, I think about what has and what hasn't worked in the past and the present. And I'm all for radical reimagination and envisioning the world that we want to see and working towards that. I'm also acutely aware that we have to do things in the interim because my people are dying, and it's not just because of violence, it's because of systemic policies that is a slow death, right? Those policies that make poverty entrenched, that just punish people severely. And it's a slow death, and it's more pronounced than any mass shooting or police violence. That is a death that is killing, whether it be health, whether whatever the case may be.
Sure.
That is a slow death that is really harming our people, and we have to be mindful of that. And so we have to do things to mitigate that damage and remove ourselves from harm, and that takes a lot of different tactics and approaches. But the goal is to realize what's taking place and think about the future that we want to have and actively working towards that.
Yeah. I always say that when you go to the grindstone, it's jujitsu. Like, you can have absolutism when you're not anywhere near the grindstone. When the rubber meets the road, you're playing. It's jujitsu, man. It's chess. It's judo. It's give up. It's get a little. It's give up a little.
Strategy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's a chess match.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of easy absolutism online, and certainly in the gun community online, there's a lot of that. But the general liberal, first and foremost, you don't know me very well, but you should know this about me. Whatever people who are calling themselves liberals these days, what they're doing isn't really liberalism, particularly the Democrats and the gun control platform. The term has been co-opted like many other things. And it's unfortunate. It's really unfortunate because liberalism has a lot of power, and it's not into that power right now because it's become more superficial. It's a long discussion. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. So how would you distinguish between being a liberal and being a leftist? Or do you make a distinction?
I do. And this is we could do a whole week of podcasts for this. So the best way that I can put it is liberalism is a seesaw balancing act between the consideration of equality for people and individual freedoms, liberty. There has never been a time in human history where if you fight for these things, that seesaw goes away. If you try to get a little bit more for equality, you give up some individuality. If you give up some individuality, you're going to give up a little bit of equality. You're going to give up a little bit of the collective. When you get a little bit more for the individual, you get less for the collective. That's kind of the general tendency. There's a lot of debate we can have inside of that. Mm-hmm. But liberalism is the jujitsu of that seesaw, and trying to, under the context of where you are, make it the best that you can. That's really it. Leftists don't want to, well, they're hypocrites, but they want to maximize equality.
That's going to hurt some feelings.
That's all right. That's all right. Because all they do is shit on us anyway. And all they've done, I have some friends that are kind of leftist. They think they're leftist. They're not. They're more like democratic socialists. So like liberalism's range is like from what we call the libertarian, a little bit to the right. Like they're like open to like social progress, but they want like fiscal conservatism type stuff. And then all the way to like the Bernie people. That's like the range of liberalism, I would say. It's viable. Once you get past the middle of Bernie to the left, that's leftist. Mm-hmm. And so leftists want to maximize a system that helps everybody. That's a long conversation, but basically gives up everybody else's individuality while they secretly hold their own individual liberties, while everybody else, fuck whatever you want. What's best for the large group is what we're going to do at any cost. So leftists and like hardcore progressive people, progressivist-y type people, mm-hmm. they're completely okay with an authoritarian left-wing state of totalizing control for behavior. If the goals are everybody gets treated equally, then they will pile systems and policies and laws up to the point where it fucking chokes everyone. And we're going to choke society into a rainbow coalition. That's basically what's at the heart of it. They don't care. They'll just, whatever it is, another law, another policy, more money, they'll just lay into it. That's really what they believe. And so the difference is we would never do that because of the seesaw.
Gotcha.
Right? That's basically the difference. And the difference between us and the libertarian, there's a lot of crossover, but the libertarians don't really want to use government for social progress. They want to just kind of smoosh government into the smallest thing possible that just deals with the least amount of stuff possible, which is not really going to help very much for leverage for social progress. It's going to like take care of the army and the banks and the infrastructure and stay out of it, in the courts and stay out of it, right? Liberals should want to use the courts and policy for some social leverage, but not go apeshit on it. Because at some point, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think we draw all the way back to the answer or the question of what is liberalism. The root of liberalism is it is the primary human experience that whatever hierarchy or group you are inside of, power will collect. It will move up, it will turn back down, and it will put pressure on everybody else downward. That human abuse comes from the top of every hierarchy. And that usually means some kind of institution or multiple institutions. So the first job of liberalism is to watch what's above you and be able to counter it. And that will be any institution or power cluster that gathers up there. That's why a liberal should never be like ape shit on policy and ape shit on doing every single thing from the government and laws. We're supposed to be watching it. Right? So that's, I hope that lays it out, but that's the difference between ourselves, leftists, and libertarians. What has happened to liberal in the world? I don't even know what's going on at this point.
No, I appreciate that. And I asked out of genuine curiosity. Yeah. And I know it may seem like a divergence from the the conversation, what I think is relevant, right? Because when I think about the Black community, and me personally, I don't attract to any particular label, even though I may trend to voting a particular way. I can't really put myself, and I think the Black community can't put ourselves in a particular box because of the nuances and the challenges and the political perspectives and the strategies, the jujitsu that we have to take into account that prevents us from really identifying with a particular political ideology, even though some of us do. I think, you know, when the liberals and the leftists were lambasting the Black community for voting a particular way and not voting for Bernie Sanders in the situation to the same levels that the Black community voted for Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden, et cetera, et cetera. I think what is missing there, even though I was kind of, shocked by it as well, not shocked, but not thrilled with, some of the voting choices. I understood it because of the practicality that a lot of Black Democratic voters take into account when they go to the voting booths. And so I asked that question because I've been in the social sector for a while, and I have conversations with a lot of liberals and leftists, and they oftentimes wonder why the Black community is not voting in their interests the same way they say poor Republicans aren't voting in their interests. And I think a lot of times that is because of the gap in the cultural awareness and understanding of different communities. And I think more work needs to be done to really understand potential voting block or why there is voter apathy. But I don't think I think there's more self-righteousness and talking down on people than there is willing to understand where people are coming from. And I think that is a political hindrance for our country across the board.
There's a major problem with, first and foremost, you're never going to meet somebody who slaughters the left wing as much as I do as liberal. Like, I don't see myself as I don't wake up every day and go, I'm a liberal. As a matter of fact, I walked out of the whole political delineation thing for a long time. And I only came back to it because, I can be highly spiritual and on the outside and wave my finger at everything that's going on and be better than it and beyond it. But if I want to be effective at the grassroots and at the thing, I just felt like I had to choose, right? I had to choose. And so liberal fits me the best.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm not defined by whatever the Democrats are, or whatever other people think liberal is, or whatever. But the defining feature of the left wing is a high disgust trait. So that's a psychological trait. You might know about it. Disgust trait. Everybody scores differently on that realm, on that range. High disgust, highly sensitive, and things give them disgust. Like anything that's outside of a person's particular little fucking likes, they don't like it, right? If it's just a little bit outside, they don't like it, right? And that's a defining feature, is high disgust trait. The other one is entitlement. And then the other one is what Obama called circular firing squads. Like, if you don't exactly match that person's values, the tight little circle they have around themselves and their values, they'll fucking stab you in the back. They'll shit on you. No problem. And that's why the left isn't as empowered as it should be, because of these tendencies, the entitlement, the high disgust trait, and the judging everybody else for not being exactly as you want them to be. And we're hoping to change that, right? Of course.